Part two of this discussion of the ascension I have titled On Earth as It Is, or On Earth as in Heaven, because we were moving from last time when we talked specifically about the roles of Christ as he ascended into heaven, now into some of the implications for this. This is our first communion meeting in person. Thank you to everybody who is here. Thanks to everyone who is joining us online. Quick note, we will not have any programs, not confirmation or youth group or anything next because it's Campbell County School District spring break. So congratulations and enjoy that off. Scheduling later. All right, topics. Last week, like I mentioned, we talked about the ascension, viewing it from the perspective of Christ's roles that he takes on more fully when he ascends into heaven. Christ was always the high priest, he was always the king, but by ascending into heaven, he has become the eternal high priest, high king. I encourage you again to check out last week's presentation for more on that. This week, we're going to take a slightly different look at the exact same event, the ascension, because I feel like the ascension often gets overlooked. It's part of the Paschal mystery of Christ. It's part of that crowning moment of our faith, if you will, but it often kind of gets brushed over as just kind of the nice speedy exit at the end of the Gospels, right? So tonight we're going to take a little bit more time to unpack that in detail before next time we continue this broad series on Christ's presence among us by diving into the Pentecost, and from there in April into what exactly it means to be church and how God continues to be present through his church in the world. Christianity, as we have learned this whole year, is a lot about a relationship. It's about growing in connection with God and with the triune God who is love itself, love that sustains and is at the foundational core of the universe. The whole purpose of Jesus Christ, in a sense, is to call us into that relationship with the loving God and to give us a way to do that. Now, it kind of seems weird that if the whole purpose of your religion is that you should come to know God and come to God through this person, that person would disappear at one point in time, right? After all, if the whole point of your religion is to come to believe in this person, then wouldn't it be more effective, wouldn't it be better evidence to persuade people if Jesus were still walking around in our midst doing his thing like he did 2,000 years ago? It seems like, I don't know, maybe you could have planned that better. Well, especially when you consider that Jesus is like, the resurrected Jesus is different. Like, he does things that are very strange and that don't quite make a lot of sense. Evidence here. The post-resurrection Jesus can do things like walk through walls into locked rooms, as it reports in the Gospel of John, but then he also, after he appears in that room, has a physical body. So on the one hand, he looks kind of like a ghost, does things that a ghost does things that a spirit does, but then he's not a spirit because he invites his disciples to touch his hands and see, oh my gosh, he actually does have a body. Turn that back around, Jesus seems to have, after his resurrection, this weird ability to change his appearance, or at least to not be immediately recognized to even people who have been his disciples for like a year or more at a time. Thinking of the Road to Emmaus story, where the disciples in this case don't recognize Jesus until the last possible moment. That's weird. Most of us can't just change our face or be more difficult to recognize just because we're human. And yet, even as he does all of those strange, unrecognizable things, he still eats normal food like a normal human does. In particular, he seems to eat a lot of fish after the resurrection. I don't know exactly the symbolic significance of that, but he does eat right in front of his disciples. All of these things, these kind of contradictions in Jesus's post-resurrection behaviors, you'd think would be great compelling evidence for like, well, if we saw Jesus today, then obviously I would believe in him because he does all of these strange things that no normal human can do. Might I suggest that if we take this evidence as a starting point, we can actually start to deduce some very interesting things about the ascension and what the ascension means. So, taking all of these traits now, I want to consider these ones on the left here, walking through walls, changing his appearance. These are all kind of like symptomatic. These are traits that you would normally associate if you like looking in the Old Testament with angels, spiritual beings. I think walking through walls, obviously the angel Gabriel just appeared to Mary wherever she was, and then he just kind of disappeared. Likewise, angels in the Old Testament don't necessarily have recognizable faces, or they seem to change their appearance as they're doing their work, thinking Book of Tobit here. So those look like spiritual beings. And then on the other side, you have things that establish Jesus as very clearly human. And we don't need to look to the Old Testament for that. Humans throughout time kind of do these specific things. What does this mean? I would argue that what you get out of this is that Jesus seems to be doing something more than just being one or the other. He seems to be doing both. He's a spiritual being and a earthly bodily creature at the same time. And that should ring familiar if looking at this diagram from earlier in the year, that, like, remember, humans were called to be like creatures of this earthly world made of dirt and dust, but also with a spiritual component breathed life into by God. So Jesus seems to be a creature now, or acting like a creature that exists both as a spiritual and a earthly creature. This is good. This is what humanity was about, but it also carries with it some weirdness to it. It's weird because creatures that, or because to be both spiritual and earthly up to this point in the biblical story is kind of really, in a sense, unheard of. Something that is a creature that, let me make sure I get my words right on this. There's creatures that live in the heavenly realm, those being the spiritual beings like angels, not aliens. And there are creatures that live in the earthly realm, like animals, dirt, creatures, plants, things like that. These are the two different realms, and they don't necessarily overlap much. Sometimes in the Old Testament, you get an angel that'll take a message from God in the heavenly realm down to earth, down to the earthly realm, everything we can see, taste, touch, feel with a body. An angel will come down and convey a message from God, and that'll be great, and it'll help us along as we're moving, striving towards God. But the angel never like takes on a body or anything like that. An angel is just kind of there. It's a spiritual creature. It doesn't have a body necessarily, and then it returns back into heaven, into God's presence from which it came. In the meanwhile, it is pretty much entirely unheard of for a human to go from in this material world into God's kind of space, the heavens, as it is described in the Old Testament. There are a couple asterisks with that one, but overall, humans don't go into God's space. And that's about to be really important, so put a pin in that one. And certainly, God doesn't come down into our space. But wait a second, that happened. One of the central teachings of our faith, what separates Christianity from a lot of the world's religions, is this mystery of the incarnation, that God, who is like up in his heavenly realm, infinitely beyond all of us, that he somehow takes on flesh and becomes not just an angel to us, where he shows up and then kind of disappears, but he takes on our nature. He gets into this earthly material world in a very real way, in a more real way than anything up to that point. That's incredibly significant, and might I argue, that is the foil, you could say, to the ascension, that gives the ascension its meaning. Because at the incarnation, God comes down into our realm, you could say, and takes on our flesh. Jesus, then being God and human, takes at the ascension our humanity into the heavenly realm, into the place, into the very being of God. So these two events are kind of foils, God coming down into our space, and now an ascension, the ascension, humanity going up into God's space. There are a lot of implications to that, not least of which is that it can inform our understanding of, like, did Christ at the ascension like vertically fly up into space and his body is just somewhere beyond the atmosphere in outer space right now? Not necessarily, right? I scanned the catechism kind of high and low on this point to see what exactly happened at the ascension. And the best way I can sum it up is actually with this quote I found from Archbishop Daniel Pilarczyk, where he said that after a certain time, the disciples stopped experiencing Jesus in quite the same way, but they still knew he was with them, right? see, whether or not Jesus like flies into the sky is a little bit beside the point. As the Catechism defines it, it says that Jesus is, that at the ascension, Jesus takes his humanity into the presence of God, into the heavenly realm, whatever that may be. Two important points there: humanity and into the heavenly realm. So did he fly straight up? Maybe. I don't know. Couldn't find a straight answer on that one. But we do know that his humanity was not lost at the ascension. Christ indeed carried everything that was human about him: his DNA, his blood, his body, all of that stuff he took with him into the heavens. So I have a quick Pear Deck question here, just to keep tracking's sake. This is a multiple choice question. Which event in the life of Christ does the ascension mirror? Just a quick comprehension checking on this one. If you haven't joined in yet, that's our code, INKJAY. We'll do a quick poll around. Which event in the life of Christ does the ascension mirror? All right, let's show them. See what we got. Okay. So the correct answer here is actually the incarnation, right? Thinking back to that previous slide. In the incarnation, God comes down. The ascension is kind of this mirror image of that, right? God comes down in the incarnation. In the ascension, humanity goes up. Make sure, yes, that was the slide. Thank you for putting it there, right? Incarnation, God comes down. Ascension, God goes up. I keep coming back to this point, and I want this to get lodged in your brain because I think it's very important to tease out all the implications of this event. So that's that one. Thank you for submitting that response there. On to the more implications. It is easy to think about the resurrection, and many of us often do think about the resurrection, especially pop culture Christianity. We think about the resurrection and ascension as great acts of God. This is something that God has done through us or for us to allow us to be close to him, and that is true, totally, utterly true. As C.S. Lewis says, though, we less often think of what is equally true, and that the ascension and resurrection are the triumphs of humanity as well. Because in this act, this great thing that God has done for us, in coming down to be like us, God taking humanity to himself now allows humanity not just to go into heaven, because Jesus is not just the perfect human. He's not just humanity raised and perfected. He's also God, right? So when Jesus returns into heaven, he doesn't just take our humanity into the spiritual realm where all the angels are. He actually takes our humanity into the very heart of God, the God who sustains the universe with his love, the God who is more essential than anything else. And that breaks, at least within the Hebrew cosmology, you might say, that breaks some rules, right? God is supposed to be up there, and humanity and all these other earthly creatures are supposed to be down here. But now humanity has been taken into God himself, and God has come into our midst. It's almost as if you can imagine, and this is the image that's been standing out to me lately, you can imagine that Christ has, in taking his humanity up, has punched a hole in heaven, in the fabric of reality. And because of that hole has been punched there by Jesus's humanity, God can come rushing back through that hole. Now that there is forever, now a certain part of us has been taken up into God. Somebody with whom we probably share at least some extent of our genetic code is now not just on earth, but is in fact in God. And that is the key, in a sense. That opens up this hole in the heavens through which now God doesn't have to remain up there. He can instead come rushing back down to us, the very fundamental reality that sustains the universe. And I find that just absolutely mind-boggling, that now there is not only God on earth, but also humankind in heaven, indeed within the very heart of. So you might say, well, that's all kind of fine and dandy and sounds like great theology, and you're really excited about that, and that's great. But why does that matter? What does that practically change about our lives as Christians? So I want to present to you quickly here 2 reasons why I think the Ascension is absolutely revolutionary and why I want this to be true and why I believe this. Reason number 1, kind of the we go up side of this reason, right? It means that Christians, when we pray, a part of us is already in God. The best of me as a person is already in God himself, and so we don't just pray to God in the way that like Muslims pray to Allah or Hindus pray to another God that's just kind of out there. We don't pray from outside of God, we pray from inside of God. Our prayer and our talking with God is actually our participation in the life of God. Just as the Son is talking to the Father and the Holy Spirit is talking to the Son and with God, our prayer is us now talking to God, with God, as the Son, as Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit talk to God, which is mind-boggling to me. It's a really different position than any other faith really has. Our prayer is a participation in the life of the uncreated life, that's the uncreated being that sustains the universe. Crazy. Reason number 2, and perhaps one of the most relevant things for us right now as Catholics, is that this means that heaven isn't just ahead of us. The Ascension means that heaven is not just somewhere we go when we die, it's actually about heaven breaking in all around us. Because Christ has entered into the heavenly realm, but now God is coming right back through that hole that Christ has made, you could think, right? Heaven is breaking in to our space, just as did God at the incarnation. And so God can be present, working, moving in the world in so many different ways. Heaven is like, and presence, communion with God is what we all really long for at the root of our being. Teresa's doing a phenomenal talk tonight with the youth, actually, about that longing in our hearts for God that we often try to fill with other things. But because that fulfillment is in heaven, and heaven is in breaking in all around us, it means that we can get a little bit of that fulfillment. We can have a foretaste, you could say, of that fulfillment right here, right now, that leads us on and calls us onward towards the ultimate fulfillment. This world is not forsaken. It's not left alone. God hasn't just kicked it out. But because of Christ, because of his incarnation and his ascension, this world has been transformed, or the seeds of its transformation have been sown within it. And God is at work to bring about and to grow and cultivate those seeds wherever they may be found. We might not see them all. Sometimes it's kind of through a veil, right? We don't necessarily see heaven breaking in around us. We don't see that final fulfillment coming in because it's happening behind the veil of this physical world that we're living in. But the truth of the matter is, and that we can see through eyes of faith by knowing God and by knowing his kind of work, seeing the stamp of his work, is that heaven is breaking in right now, and we can experience a little bit of it as we are striving for the fulfillment of it. Moral of the story, end conclusion for this. The Ascension is, to me, a reality upending scale kind of thing. Something that really greatly informs who we are as Christians, because it means that everything that we're about is happening. Like, the life of God is still happening in our midst. God is moving us towards fulfillment, but he's giving us the seeds of fulfillment even right here, right now. And that's what the church is all about. We're the people who get to carry those seeds of fulfillment and cultivate them with God and help move them towards that fulfillment. It's crazy to think that somebody who is kind of like me in a lot of ways, who has, dried out skin and weird ticks, is actually up there in heaven with God. It can be just as weird to think that God is moving here in our midst in an equally real way that he was moving beforehand. I love this quote from St. John Chrysostom to illustrate the point. What news is more beautiful than this, that there is God on earth and man in heaven? And if God has brought heaven to earth, even if in a veiled way, then did Jesus really leave in the first place, right? If Jesus went into heaven and now heaven is coming and it's arriving right now, then is he really that far away? So this Lent, kind of the prayer challenge of this, but I would invite you to pray with this Lent. Take this idea that heaven is breaking in right now and ask God for the grace to see it where it's breaking in, to see the reality that God is working in these ordinary midst, the extraordinary things that God is doing amidst the ordinary. Pray for the grace to see it, to see the heaven around you, and then for the additional grace to change your life and orient your life to God so that you can be about those things and that your life may be on earth as it is in heaven, even before you get to heaven. On that note, last Pear Deck question for the night. How can I pray for you? I would love to take this, to take your prayer requests, what you're hoping to see reborn, resurrected at Easter, and to be praying for you this Easter, this whole Lent leading up to Easter. So I invite you to, in Pear Deck, if you haven't shared an intention yet this year, to share one with me. Otherwise, share a new one if you don't have one yet. And we will, or if you would like to share a new one. And we'll take a moment here to pray as a community with these in person. And then I'll take these to my own prayer on every day. I take this list of prayer that I've been gathering to my own morning prayer and to praying for you guys. And we'll continue to pray for all of you and your intentions through to the end of Lent. So if you want to leave a prayer intention, please do. I'll give you like 3 minutes on this one, or 2 minutes probably. Yeah, let's do 2 minutes to share a prayer intention. And then we'll show them briefly on the screen here and we'll pray for them. I'll also cut this chunk out of the recording video so you don't have to worry about any of your prayer intentions being out there on the interwebs. And as through Pear Deck, everything's anonymous. So I invite you to share a prayer. Thanks to everybody who shared an intention. Thank you for being vulnerable. I look forward to praying for you guys and praying with you guys. So thank you for that. As a couple of concluding notes, there will be, again, no programs next week, but March 24th will be our regular cohort A and B in-person meeting. There will be no classes or programs in Holy Week. Instead, I invite you to take advantage of any number of the beautiful liturgies that are going to be available that week as a family. It's truly one of the best and most wonderful, like, experiential sides of our faith is all of Holy Week. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. Circle of Grace stuff. Not too many people on that one, so don't worry. First Communion signups are still live, so if you haven't gotten signed up yet, I think most people have, but if you haven't signed up or if you need to change your sign up, you can still do that. Please make sure to let me know how many people you're expecting on that sign up form, just so that we can plan for pews and spaces a little bit better. This is the end of our presentation, so folks who are online at home can sign off. Thank you for coming. As we transition, getting ready for some Eucharistic adoration here, I invite you can stand up and stretch if you want to. We're going to have a good amount of good prayer time here. So thank you, and we'll get transitioned and set up. I'll have a brief intro in just a moment.